Incompetence and inattention to detail are at the heart of this story, but it is a strange and magical story all the same. It was the year I spent as manager of our horse boarding facility in Ventura County, California, while Sweetie was in North Carolina getting our new life organized. When things were booming, Sweetie would have between 90 and 120 horses on the property. Now, because of the exodus that began as soon as we announced the property was for sale, there were only about 60 horses remaining. We considered hiring a manager, but after interviewing a couple applicants, Sweetie convinced herself I was the man for the job. Sweetie's policy was to check each horse twice a day, and I did this too, or usually did. I might notice a water fountain was broken, or that some horse didn't get fed, or got fed the wrong hay, or was biting the tail off the mare in the next stall. And I'm sure I missed a lot, but for the most part, the ranch ran smoothly. The one secret I did know is that if you kept the vibes tranquilo, the horses tended to get into less trouble. However, after a long period of calm, a time of tension descended on the ranch. The tractor broke down in the arena. A dead mouse was discovered in one of the horses' water bowls. A cough spread through the barn. Then a horse got diarrhea. It might have been my fault or had nothing to do with me whatsoever. Like most things with horses, the truth is often murky. One night at the height of this unrest, about 2 in the morning, I was awakened by noises in the garage. I heard cans of paint falling down from the shelves. I thought it was a raccoon or a possum or one of the hombres drying his laundry, but it was too late for that. When I opened the back door, I saw a horse had wandered into the garage. The horse was a gelding, an Arab, brown, nothing flashy. I knew most of our horses by sight, but I didn't recognize this one. Now, the Arab was already spooked and became much more so when I switched on the garage light. He bolted down the driveway towards the barn, hooves pounding on the asphalt walk. Blocked by the gate, he cut across the lawn and slipped in the ice plants. He got up, slipped again, then a hiss and the lawn sprinklers came on. The horse kicked wildly, rolled on his side, and got cast against the front paddock where the young colts lived. Frightened by the water and caught in the fence, he began to bray as if his very life was in danger. It was a scene out of Picasso's Guernica. Finally, he managed to tumble back over, kicking frenziedly, tearing up the lawn, spraying mud, but still couldn't get up. For a long moment, he kneeled in the sprinkler, pathetic, defeated, head down as if in prayer, almost too sad to watch. Then, in a supreme act of will, he arched his neck to the sky and began his struggle again. I swung open the front gate, and when the Arab finally managed to stand, he took off through it and galloped towards the pipe corrals in the back of the property. I grabbed a lead rope and a halter out of the garage and went to wake Lucio, my head honcho, who lived in a one-room apartment in the barn with his wife and 2 babies. We had no problem locating the gelding. We could hear the other horses scurrying about in their stalls as the Arab pranced around them. We blocked him between 2 ends of the pipe corral, and Lucio slipped the halter over his head. Once he had been captured, the other horses calmed down. I shone my light on the horse. He was soaking wet and disheveled, but seemed unhurt. In the beam, his eyes flashed crimson like glowing ruby orbs, but there was no more desperation. In fact, just the opposite. The eyes seemed to radiate calm, a certain peace beyond my understanding. Lucio recognized the horse. He lived in the far pasture, the most remote spot on the property. It was a cold night and dark. A patch of cloud cleared overhead, unveiling a canopy of stars. A pack of coyotes howled. I inhaled sage, eucalyptus, orange blossoms from a nearby grove, dried dung, and horses. I'd grown to love these smells, and it suddenly struck me how pleasurable ranch life was. We led the horse back to the pasture, where we saw that there was an opening between the fence and the gate post that was held together by baling wire. Somehow it had come apart, enough for the horse to slip under the wire and escape. Luckily, the other 2 horses in the pasture stayed behind, but this was the sort of breach of security that never should have happened. Lucio and the other hombres should have seen this when they fed that evening, and more to the point, I should have noticed on my nightly rounds. I instructed Lucio not to tell anyone about the horse getting out, knowing everyone would freak if they found out. If this had been a valuable horse or a competition horse, I wouldn't have done this. It would have not only been irresponsible, it would have been a criminal action. But this was a retired trail horse, rarely visited by its owner, and rarely ridden. Best let sleeping nags lie. Yo entiendo, Marcos, Lucio answered in a conspiratorial tone. Esta mejor, see? The next morning, Lucio secured the gate and told me the horse was okay. I didn't go look for myself. I was late for an appointment in Los Angeles. That evening, when I returned, Sandra Wheeler, the owner of the Milagro, that was the Arab's name as it turned out, was pulling out as I was pulling into the drive. Sandra waved as she passed. No hint of trouble. I figured she didn't slow to talk to me because she was 2 weeks behind on her board. Before entering the ranch, I stopped at the roadside mailbox. Lucio came to greet me. He seemed agitated. ¿Qué pasa? I asked. What's happening? Marcos, muy malo. El caballo está muerto. Muerto? ¿Qué caballo? El caballo de la otra noche. I couldn't believe this was happening. Sí, ¿verdad? Sí, Marcos. Lucio slashed his finger across his throat dramatically for emphasis. Milagro was dead. Blood rushed to my head. I asked Lucio if he had mentioned what had happened to anyone. He assured me he hadn't. I asked him again if he was sure the horse was okay when he saw him in the morning. Sí, Marcos, sí, no problema. We looked at each other, looked towards the ranch, and then both cracked up. Yeah, it's not funny, but it was too absurd not to laugh. Then I did some quick calculations. How bad was the situation? Sandra Wheeler hadn't been out of shape when she had passed me moments earlier. I assumed someone had called her to break the news. That was good. But the fact that this happened on a day I was absent was not good. I considered changing clothes, but decided it might be better to meet the crisis in a coat and tie. I headed straight to the pasture. The other 2 horses were acting as if nothing was happening, ambling towards me in hopes I might have a carrot or an apple for them. In the center of the pasture was the dead horse on its back, eyes open, tongue out, 4 legs sticking straight up. It looked like a bloated sofa. This was bad imagery for a family-friendly farm, but it was also beautiful in a bizarre way. I couldn't help myself from examining the scene with a painter's eye. The darkening indigo sky, the sofa posed against a pastoral backdrop of a neighboring avocado and citrus orchard. I thought of Ed Kienholz, an artist whose sculptural tableaus were often constructed out of found objects: beds, radios, hospital refuse, TVs, cars. The dead horse seemed very Kienholzian. I astral traveled to the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art and visualized the sofa horse next to Andy Warhol Brillo boxes and a Damien Hirst formaldehyde preserved shark. But I was blasted back to the pasture when I noticed what looked like a patch of dried blood in the ground. I hadn't noticed any blood when I'd inspected the horse after we'd caught him, but since it had been dark and Milagro had been wet from the sprinklers, I might have overlooked a wound. I kicked dirt over the blood. Even if the escape never be known, if it was thought that the horse had cut an artery on an exposed nail or some other sharp object in the pasture, I would be just as culpable. Fortunately, when I inspected the horse, there was no sign of bleeding. Until he was turned over, no one would be able to tell. Stood over him a long time just looking, just trying to take it in. A dead horse is a formidable thing, not a dog or a cat or a coyote or a fox on the side of the road. I put my hand on his head and said a prayer for his soul and thought of Grumpy, my trusty steed who had given up the ghost a few years back, and then I headed to the barn to get a tarp to cover the corpse. Once the tarp was secured over the horse, my next task was to contact Sandra Wheeler. I'd assumed that one of the trainers had phoned her and that's how she knew her horse was dead, but I was wrong. Sandra hadn't known anything was wrong and no one said a word to her. Nobody even knew who she was because she hadn't been to the ranch in months. Turns out she had dreamed about Milagro the night before. Her impression was that the horse knew something was wrong and was trying to contact her. She didn't go into details. She only said it was such a vivid and overpowering dream that she left work early the next afternoon to see what the situation was, something she could ill afford to do. She got to the ranch, everything seemed normal, the hunter jumpers in their arena, the dressage riders in their arena, everyone going about their business, but when she got to the pasture to visit her horse, there he was, dead. I kept saying, "You mean no one told you? That's so weird." I can't imagine what Sandra thought. It was such a surreal situation. Her interpretation of the dream was that Milagro was trying to tell her goodbye. Who knows? Maybe his escape the night before had been a last fling, a mad lark. Maybe it just stressed out an already weakened heart. We concluded it had been a heart attack. I decided any additional information would be counterproductive, but I did gallantly offer to make arrangements to have the horse taken away, and for that she was grateful. Sandra came out the following morning, and together we met the horse remover. This consisted of a mother-son team with a specially designed flatbed truck and a winch. They got the harness around the horse's rear legs and dragged him onto the lowered bed. He remained on one side through this process, so it was impossible to judge if he had been wounded. I was much relieved there was no visible blood. Sandra felt guilty for being late on her board and sad that her horse was dead, but she was also relieved that some of the financial burden had been lifted. She was even more relieved when I told her I would prorate her horse's board off her bill since he wouldn't be finishing out the month. From my perspective, things couldn't have turned out better. I dodged a major bullet. No one would ever know the truth. Hell, I was so relieved, I even paid the bill for the removal truck. It was the least I could do. Hey.
Gun went off, kid went down, no one blinked, and feeling like he ought to sit out the side. That lonely road less traveled was hardly his friend, led him into battle, sit out the side.